Hello, students. Well, yesterday we talked about the two types of land plants, the non-vascular and the vascular land plants. And I have a couple questions for you by way of review. First, what do vascular plants have, everybody? Vascular tissue, hopefully you said. What are the two types of vascular tissue? Hopefully you said xylem and phloem. And the final question for you is, what flows through phloem? That's right. Food flows through phloem. Well, today we are going to take our discussion of vascular land plants a little bit further, and we're going to be talking about what vascular plants have. And so let's begin. Let's get our books opened here and let's talk about vascular plants and what they possess. And then we'll talk in detail about three main parts. Vascular plants have true roots, stems, and leaves. So as you're writing this down, you can probably guess what the three main parts of our notes today are going to be: roots, stems, and leaves. That's right. So why don't we begin with roots? Roots. What function do roots serve? Well, they serve a couple of different functions. Number one, they are like an anchor for a plant in the ground. If a vascular plant, look at this picture of a tree, for instance. Imagine this tree. We'll assume that it's a big oak tree, maybe in your backyard. Let's assume it didn't have roots at all. What do you think would happen to that big old tree when we get a windstorm blowing through town? Yeah, it's going to blow over. So, in fact, we've had some really big storms come through this area over the years, and maybe some of you have seen that even big old trees can be knocked down despite their big root system, and you can even see their root system like yanked out of the ground. Imagine if they didn't have a root system to anchor them in the first place. Wow. But that's not the only function. Another function of roots is that the roots themselves are responsible. They have a designated purpose, a specific function for the plant to absorb the water and the minerals from the soil. So vascular land plants have this network. It's almost like the mycelium of the fungi we learned about a few topics back, growing in the soil and extracting the minerals and nutrients. The one big difference between fungi and plants, well, you tell me, what's one big difference between fungi and plants? What can plants do that fungi cannot do? Make their own food, because plants, as you know, are autotrophs and not heterotrophs. All right, so roots absorb water and minerals from the soil. Very, very important function if the plant is going to survive. Think about this for a moment. Imagine if you never, ever took in any liquids. You would be dead within about 3 days. You would dehydrate. Now, some of you might be saying, well, wait a minute, I don't drink water every day. Well, think about the food that you eat. Many foods that you eat contain a lot of moisture. You got to take in a lot of moisture, especially if you're an active person. It's essential for life, just like we learned about in the first unit of the year, and the cellular processes that take place. In order for the chemistry to take place in the cells, you need the water in there. It's no different for plants. The plants need water, just like any living thing needs water. And it's the roots in these plants that absorb the water from the soil. Next, here's another important component of roots. They also store materials. In particular, they do store the minerals as well, but they also store food. Remember what flows through phloem? Food goes up and down, and there are a lot of what are called root plants. Think of potatoes or carrots, beets, radishes. You can think of a whole host of others too. But root plants store their food in the roots for later use. Now, we humans have discovered that and learned that over the years, and we've taken advantage of that fact by growing some root crops ourselves and eating the roots ourselves because it is stored food. Food that was stored it was intended for the plant to use, but we use it instead because, let's face it, it's yummy. I mean, who doesn't like a good baked potato? Whoo! Or carrots. Oh, raw carrots are delicious. And they're good for the eyes, too. Woo! All right. Now, not all roots are the same. In fact, there are two general types of roots based on their characteristic shape. So let's talk about these two types, the fibrous root and the tap root. Let's begin with the fibrous roots. Fibrous roots can be described as a tangled mass. Imagine if you had long curly hair and you had a fitful night. You didn't sleep well, so you were tossing and turning all night long. If you've got long curly hair, my heart goes out to you because I have long curly hair too. Well, not currently, but if I were to let this grow longer, I would have long curly hair. When I was younger, I used to have long curly hair, at least at some point in my life. And I know some of you are laughing at me right now with my long curly hair. But my point is, if you wake up one morning and you've got long curly hair, you know what it's like to try to comb or brush that tangled mass of hair. That is a good description of fibrous roots. Fibrous roots are just all interwoven and tangled up. Grass is a great plant, as an example of a plant that has fibrous roots. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been outside and tried to rip up a handful of grass by the roots? You can't get one strand of grass or one blade of grass out of the ground without ripping the roots apart from other blades of grass because they're all interwoven. That's one reason why grass is a great ground cover, because of the fibrous roots. They help prevent soil erosion, helps keep the ground together and preventing it from eroding away. So fibrous roots, first type of root. Second type of roots are tap roots. Now, when I say tap root, I don't mean this kind of tap. By the way, I was talking the other day and I couldn't think of the word I was trying to say, and I was doing this with my finger, and my one daughter said, "Oh, finger buffer." Do you get that? Finger buffering. Like I was silent when I was thinking. All right, maybe you get that. I thought it was hysterical. All right, second type of root is a tap root. The major distinguishing characteristic of tap roots that separate them from fibrous roots is that tap roots are deep and penetrating. A great example of taproot, a carrot. Think about the shape of a carrot. Look at it. You like my carrot drawing, by the way? All right. Think about the shape of a carrot. Unless it's a little baby carrot, in which case it still has the same basic shape. It's just not as deep as a full-blown carrot. But carrots are the root of a carrot plant. When you eat a carrot, like Bugs Bunny. Hey, what's up, Doc? Eating that carrot. That carrot is the root of a plant, and it grows deeply in a more sandy soil, so it can penetrate deeper. But off of that main root, there are also root hairs that protrude from the sides of the tap root, which are also responsible for extracting the water and minerals from the soil. Okay, so there are our two types of roots. Review them: fibrous and tap. All right, let's work our way up a plant's structure now to the stems. Stems provide support to a plant. Think about it. Let's look at this plant. It kind of looks like a little sunflower, doesn't it? If a sunflower didn't have a stem, where would that flower be? Yeah, on the ground. It wouldn't be a sunflower, would it? In fact, sunflowers, I don't know if you've ever grown sunflowers, but those flowers get really, really heavy. Or here's another example: corn. Think about corn on the cob. It grows on a corn stalk. That stalk is a very strong stem because the corn that grows on corn plants, that's really heavy. Stems have to provide a lot of support, especially if it's a big plant. Or think of a tree. Trees have really big stems, woody stems, to help support them and hold them up from falling down. So, what do stems do? Well, stems transport materials between the roots and the leaves. Transports materials between the roots and the leaves. We've already talked about the roots, fibrous roots and tap roots, and the function of roots is all the same: extracting the water and minerals from the soil. And if that water and minerals has to get to upper portions of the plant, like the leaves, well, you need a transportation network, that vascular tissue. And that vascular tissue can be found in the stems of these types of plants in order to transport water and minerals up and then transport the food down. And it is a cycle that continues the entire lifespan of that plant. So stems are pretty important. But not all stems are the same. There are two types of stems. The first type of stems are called herbaceous. We pronounce this word herbaceous. The H is silent if we speak American English. However, if you speak British English, then if you were in England, you would actually pronounce the H and call it herbaceous. But in America, the H is silent and we just simply call it herbaceous. So everybody look at that word and pronounce it correctly. Herbaceous. Good. Now, what are herbaceous stems? Well, if you think about the first part of that word, you might recognize HERB is an herb, or in Britain, a herb. What are herbs? Well, some of you may have had recent experience growing herbs. Herbs are typically used as a garnishing or seasoning for other foods. But herbs are an example of an herbaceous plant. And herbaceous stems are typically green and soft. Think about a dandelion. Most of you have probably had some experience with dandelions. And don't spread this around, but when I was a kid, I used to go out in the yard and I used to grab onto dandelions, yank them out of the ground, put my thumb under the flower and pop it off and decapitate the dandelions. Have any of you ever done that? Be honest. Or how many of you have ever waited for that yellow flower to mature into that white puff ball, and then you yank it out of the ground, then you blow the little white puff ball into the air? By the way, that little white puff ball is nothing more than the seeds of a dandelion plant. And if you have a neighbor who doesn't like dandelions growing in their yard, you would not be a good neighbor if you picked up your dandelions and blew those white seeds over into their yard. Not a good idea. But dandelions, great example of herbaceous stems. They are green and soft, flexible, unlike the second type of stem, which are woody stems. Woody stems are hard and rigid. Hard and rigid. They are made of layers of xylem. How many of you can tell me what does xylem transport? Water and minerals. What does food flow through? Food flows through phloem. You'll need to know that for the quiz. Trees and shrubs, anything that you would have to cut down with a saw, has a woody stem. Woody stems are great for firewood, perhaps, but woody stems are hard and rigid. And here is a cross section of a typical woody stem. So in your book, you have this diagram. Take some time to label your diagram, and I will just discuss it briefly as you are labeling it. And I'm going to start on the outside and work my way down. So the outside of a woody stem is called the outer bark. All right, bark, not that kind of bark. You know, a tree's bark is much worse than its bite. All right. The outer bark is a hard and protective outer casing of a woody stem. Trees, obviously, different trees have different kinds of bark. In fact, in wintertime, you can actually identify the species of a tree based on how the bark looks. Some trees have a really thick bark. Some trees have a really thin bark. But right beneath the bark is a layer of phloem. And what flows through phloem, everybody? Food flows through phloem. Very good. In fact, if you're ever in a survival situation and you're starving in the middle of the woods, and let's assume it's a pine forest, the phloem of pine trees can be cut out with a knife, little strands through the bark. You can slice out little layers of phloem and boil it like spaghetti. And it is actually rather tasty, and it is filled with vitamins and minerals that can help you survive. So, don't do it if you're not in a survival situation. You don't want to be killing pine trees, but hey, you never know. That info might come in handy someday. All right, beneath the phloem is the vascular cambium. This area here is called the vascular cambium. It is essentially the new growth area. It's found right beneath the phloem. Every year, a tree, for instance, is alive. Another layer of vascular cambium is added right beneath the phloem. And if you think about it, all of those rings that you see in a cross section of a tree, and you'll see some cross sections tomorrow in the lab, all of those rings in a tree's cross section that we call growth rings are actually layers of xylem. And what flows through xylem? Water and minerals. Very good. That brings us to the very center, which is typically in many species of trees a soft core. We call that the pith. Not the pit, not the spit, but the pith with a TH at the end. The pith. So make sure your diagram is complete. If you need to pause and watch this later, feel free. Otherwise, let's move upwards to leaves. Leaves produce food through photosynthesis. Yes, that word that we've all heard, photosynthesis. And just as a quick visual here, I have this animation playing. We've got a green leaf. And what is that green stuff in a leaf that enables it to undergo photosynthesis? It's chlorophyll, found in chloroplasts. And as light shines on that chlorophyll, carbon dioxide and water from the environment enter into the leaf and are involved in a chemical reaction. The light and the chlorophyll are the catalysts, and the release or the products of that chemical reaction is oxygen that we need to breathe and carbohydrates or food. Sugar, basically, is what is produced during photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide and water go in, sugar, food, and oxygen come out through the process of photosynthesis. So leaves are really super important in the functioning of plants. So here is another diagram for you to label, and I want you to notice the different layers in this diagram. I'll start at the top and work my way down. At the very top, now as we're looking at this diagram, by the way, this is a cross section. Imagine taking a leaf and cutting it in half. Imagine this is a blade of grass, and I slice it in half, and we're looking at it under magnification. So there is a top and a bottom to that leaf. The top of a leaf is called the cuticle. The cuticle is very cute. No, the cuticle is a waxy outer coating. And it's also clear, by the way, but it's a waxy outer coating. Now, I have a question for you. Why do you think it might be important for the cuticle to have a waxy coating on it? Well, if you said to hold in the water, because wax is like waterproof, you're right. That cuticle, and some plants have a much thicker cuticle than others, like a cactus, for instance. The cuticle of a cactus, super duper thick. It's so thick, water can't evaporate out of it. But beneath the cuticle, we have the next layer, which is called the epidermis. Epidermis is also the name of our skin. Epi means outside. Dermis refers to skin. So the epidermis is literally the outside skin of a plant's leaf. Now, the epidermis is clear or transparent. Now, think about what leaves do. And can you tell me, why do you think it would be important for the epidermis to be transparent or clear? Well, if you said so sunlight can get through, you're absolutely right. Because underneath the epidermis, we've got the mesophyll. And in the mesophyll, which is also called the chlorophyll layer, that's where all of the chloroplasts are found, or a high abundance of them. And it's the chlorophyll within those chloroplasts in the mesophyll. And by the way, the prefix meso means middle like Mesozoic from last year in science. Meso means middle. The mesophyll is the middle layer of a leaf where photosynthesis actually takes place. So it's a good thing that it's clear above it. Otherwise, no light could get through chlorophyll. What a bummer that would be. And that poor plant would starve. All right, on the bottom layer of the leaf, there are a couple of things here. First, we have what are called the stoma. Everybody look at me when I say the word stoma. Now, I'd like you to say the word stoma and think about the shape of your mouth when you say stoma. When you say stoma, the shape of your mouth is an O and it's open when you are saying stoma. Now, how do you close your mouth? Some of you may not know how to do this, but how do you physiologically close your mouth? You put your lips together. When you put your lips together, your mouth is no longer open, it's closed. Practice that now. Open, closed. Your lips are like the guard cells that surround the stoma or the opening of the bottom of a leaf. And they function very much the same way as your lips do, and for very good reason. You see, plants breathe. They breathe through their stoma. They take in carbon dioxide through their stoma. The photosynthesis takes place, and the oxygen is released through their stoma. Isn't that cool? Now, if there's a rainstorm, why do you think it's a good idea for the stoma to be on the bottom side of the leaves? Why do you think they're down here and not on the top? Any idea? Well, if you said so they don't drown, you're absolutely right. In fact, during really heavy rainstorms, the stoma will even close like your mouths might close if you don't want something getting into it. All right, so we have gone over the basic parts of the three basic parts, the roots, stems, and leaves of vascular plants. I want to finish here with photosynthesis, this chemical equation. Check it out. This is what is happening chemically inside every plant cell during photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and water combine together in the presence of sunlight to produce a food sugar called glucose and oxygen. That is what photosynthesis is, chemically speaking. Now, it still remains a mystery to scientists exactly how chlorophyll does it. We still don't really know how this happens. There are many things in nature that elude the inquisitive nature of scientists. So we haven't really been able to replicate this all that well in a laboratory, but this is what plants do every day. And we can be very thankful for it because we breathe out carbon dioxide, we breathe in oxygen. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. Now, did I say that backwards for us? I think you know what I mean, right? We breathe this out, breathe this in. Plants breathe this in and breathe that out. In other words, we're a great couple. We go very well together, animals and plants on planet Earth, because we just cycle those materials back and forth. And when we die and decompose, we return the minerals to the soil that plants will grow upon again one day. So on that happy note, we can think about the circle of life, as we end for now. Bye-bye.